In 1964, I read a small piece in a New York newspaper, just a tiny little item about a man who had caught a 4,550-pound great white shark off the beaches of Long Island. And I thought to myself at the time, what would happen if one of those things came in and wouldn't go away?
It was the adventure of our lives, and we knew it.
When I think of Jaws, I think about courage and stupidity. And I think of both of those things existing underwater.
This became something that was bigger than just a movie. This became a phenomenon.
And I said, you know, if we're successful at this, people will feel about the ocean the way they felt about the shower after Psycho.
Almost everyone remembers when they first saw Jaws. Even the newer generations have seen it on television. I saw Jaws. I remember the theater I was in. And I remember what I did when I went home. I wouldn't even draw the bathwater.
This was a first novel, and it was a story about a fish. And I had no real title for it. I tried 100 different things. Some of them were quite pretentious, François Sagan kind of titles, like A Stillness in the Water and Leviathan Rising and all of that stuff. And then we ran through all sorts of cliched titles, The Jaws of Death, The Jaws of this, The Jaws of that, which all sounded terrible. And finally, with 20 minutes to go before the book had to go into production, I sat with my editor in a restaurant in New York, and I said, we don't agree on anything except one word, Jaws, call it Jaws. And he said, what does it mean? I said, I have the faintest idea, but at least it's short.
Peter Benchley's novel came to my attention and my partner Richard Zanuck's attention at approximately the same time on opposite coasts of North America.
The agency gave 4 or 5 producers an early peek.
In my case, it was a card from the offices of Cosmopolitan magazine, which my wife edited, and gave a brief précis of the novel, and the last sentence was, might make a movie.
That's why we read it overnight. Next day, we spoke to one another and said, let's do whatever we can.
They bid for it. Finally, Universal got it for a staggering sum of $150,000. And I think at the time they were expecting to make it into a good B movie, sort of a nice thriller picture, but they had no great ambition for it.
We didn't even dare to think at that time how we were going to do it, but we just wanted it. It was a good story.
I met with them constantly. I interviewed directors with them. We all worked together right from the beginning. I wrote 3 drafts of the screenplay. One of the first things Richard Zanuck said to me was, I want to get rid of that love story, the whole sex nonsense back, get rid of it. This is to be an A to Z adventure story, period.
As a condition to the purchase of the book, we had to agree to a certain director. And we had a meeting with the director and Benchley, and in which the director kept referring to the whale during the lunch.
Steven Spielberg had directed The Sugarland Express for Mr. Zanuck and for me, and we were very keen about him. But the subject of Spielberg's interest in Jaws came after The Man Who Thought the Shark Was a Whale.
The manuscript disappeared from the top of my desk one day when he'd been floating around the office.
I just remember seeing a very large, a block of pages that said Jaws on it, and I didn't know what that meant. Jaws, was it Jaws? Was it like about a dentist?
Then I got word a few days later that this would be something that Steven might be interested in doing.
We huddled with Steven Spielberg at the Bel Air Hotel in Los Angeles and committed to finishing the movie on June 30th.
There was a strike looming, and the plan was to start shooting the picture as soon as possible and finish shooting and come back to the studio before the strike.
The script was a transcript of the novel by Peter Benchley, which is what we asked for. Then another pass by Howard Sackler, Pulitzer Prize-winning playwright.
Howard Sackler's draft was a fairly conventional thriller kind of film without much humor to it, and the characters were kind of one-dimensional.
I asked Carl Gottlieb, who was a friend of mine, to come in to do a polish and to actually help me, you know, if I wanted to improvise scenes, Carl would be there to help organize the improvisation and put it on paper.
And the morning after that, I was on a plane to Martha's Vineyard with Steven to start rewriting the movie 10 days before the start of principal photography.
At that time, I was a location casting director. So I had not that much to do with those three main characters. I do think they're probably the most brilliantly cast threesome that I've ever seen on film.
I had originally suggested putting in it Paul Newman, Robert Redford, and John Voight, and David Brown and Richard Zanuck pointed out to me quite kindly that the star of this movie was a fish.
The three actors, Roy Scheider, Robert Shaw, and Richard Dreyfuss, were all of different minds and different temperaments.
Scheider had to be, forgive the cliche, a fish out of water.
We know all about you, Chief. You don't go in the water at all, do you?
It's some bad hat, Harry.
Everybody knew him from The French Connection, where he was a tough, gritty New York cop.
We couldn't find anyone for Quint.
And I wanted to go for Lee Marvin, but Lee Marvin wasn't interested.
We'd used Robert Shaw in The Sting, but he was not a superstar. He was a well-known personality, a character actor, really.
Here's to swimming with bow-legged women.
Joel Grey wanted very much to play the Richard Dreyfuss role.
I loved American Graffiti, and I had seen him in that, and George Lucas was the person who sort of said to me, why don't you cast Ricky?
So Steven tells me the story, and it was thrilling and exciting. And he said, you want to do this movie? And I said, no. And he said, why not? I said, because I'd rather watch this movie than shoot it. And then I went to see a film that I had done, The Apprenticeship of Duddy Kravitz. And I so hated my performance in this movie that I called Steven long distance and begged for the part.
He showed up and he walked in the door, and he was Hooper. He was wearing a knit hat, he was wearing the little glasses, and he had the beard.
Who are you? Matt Hooper. I'm from the Oceanographic Institute.
Steven and I looked at each other and said, that's him. Don't change a thing.
My husband tells me you're in Sharks.
The first person I cast for the movie, in fact, was Lorraine, who I had loved in a TV movie I'd seen her do called The Marcus Nelson Murders.
There was some cynical comment that Steven had bought an insurance policy by casting the studio head's wife in the film. And it's true that she's married to Sid Sheinberg, who was running the company.
Well, I've got to presume that Sid's job had something to do with the fact that I was considered for this movie. I don't like considering it, but that seems real. He and Steven were friends at that point, and Sid was sort of his mentor.
She brought a realism to the movie, a real realism to that family, which I wanted in the film.
Michael! Did you hear your father? Out of the water now!
What was different about this movie was what Steven Spielberg referred to as the special defects department, defects for effects. And a shark, that simply would not cooperate.
Steven and I, sort of in a naive way, said, you know, we're not going to do any miniatures. We're going to do this thing full size out in the real ocean. There were preliminary sketches based on the book, and they were just sort of large, rough charcoal sketches that I made to show the various sort of activity that the shark had to perform. I interviewed a number of effects people, and I got basically the same sort of reaction. This isn't going to work.
America's space program could be compared to creating a mechanical shark. It had never been done.
The shark was built by an old special effects designer builder named Bob Matty, whose principal credential for the job was that he had built the giant squid that had fought with Captain Nemo in 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea, the Disney picture.
Well, Bob said, oh, yes, we can build this. There's no problem. Of course, Bob always said that you could do anything, which was great, because it's what we needed.
But what Steven wanted was something more than that squid. He wanted something that was very real.
We were all very much afraid that it would be comical, that the audience might laugh at it.
Bruce the shark was a compendium of 3 or 4 or 5 mechanical devices. There was a left to right shark, there was a right to left shark, and there was a shark sled. The shark was called Bruce. He was named after Steven's lawyer, a very prominent theatrical attorney named Bruce Raymer.
Okay, this is a scale drawing of the rib cage, you might say, where these chromoly tubes will be placed. It's a sectional drawing, as one would draw a boat, and they build the shark from this.
A bunch of us young punks went to this hangar where they'd built the shark. Steven had been taught how to turn on the hydraulic things so the mouth would open and close. And I remember George Lucas crawled into the mouth of this thing. I was looking at these feet sticking out of the mouth, and I said, the relationship of him to that shark is the same as me to a taco. You know, I mean, this thing is going to eat all of you. It isn't going to get your leg, it's going to get you. But of course, then we broke it. We broke the damn thing, and we all ran out of there like little kids.
After a couple months, we had a frame, we had the skin on, and an unpainted shark. And we had it in the parking lot, and it wiggled. And we said, great, you know, let's go to the Vineyard and make a movie.
I wanted to test the shark prior to us leaving Los Angeles, put it in the ocean and test it before we took it back to Martha's Vineyard. And they said, no, it's going to work fine, we'll just go and do it.
The shark, they didn't have a clue, and yet they started principal photography. There were a couple of key people not cast, and the script was still to be written. So that's the perfect formula to making a successful film.
You got here, portable shower or a monkey cage?
Anti-shark cage.
One of the clever ideas in the pre-production stage of Jaws was to film real great white sharks, and Ron and Valerie Taylor were the shark photographers who got that footage in Australia.
And the best that they could come up with were like 15 to 16-foot sharks. So the idea presented itself to make a miniature cage with a midget.
That would have effectively scaled the shark up and added another, 9 feet to the overall length of the shark.
There was a stuntman named Carl Rizzo who was a little person.
So we got a midget who's supposed to be a scuba expert, right? Well, I don't think he quite was, but I mean, to get the job, to get the gig, you could say anything, sure, I could ride a horse,
So they sent him to Australia with the little tanks and the little wetsuit and the little shark cage.
Well, small people breathe the same amount of air as large people. And when they put the midget person in the cage and they set the cage down and the white sharks came, he sucked the air up just like that because he had miniature tanks.
I mean, he was so frightened. It must have been an awful experience for him. And they cranked him up as quick as they could, but he was choking for water when he came up.
They dropped the cage again without anyone. They had a crew down there shooting, and they got the shark, and it got tangled up in the cage.
A real white shark shredded the cage, just turned it into scrap metal. And they said, okay, then we'll rebuild the cage and we'll send you down in the cage. And Carl had seen what the shark had done to the, supposedly shark-proof cage. So when it came time for him to go in the water, they couldn't find him. He basically said, I'm not going back in the water. And who can blame him?
So they rewrote the ending. They rewrote the ending that the cage broke, Dreyfuss left, and the shark was battling this empty cage. Because in the book, he gets it.
Martha's Vineyard is an exclusive island, even more so today than it was then. President Clinton goes there for holidays. The wealthy end of the island, Edgartown, has always been a haven for some of the richest people in the Northeast. And they don't take kindly to innovation or anything new. And they didn't like Hollywood coming to their island.
There were many who were fascinated. There were many who wanted to be part of it. Those who were part of it loved it.
It was like nothing else had ever been there before. The island had been overrun by the press after the Kennedy incident on Chappaquiddick, but a film was sort of a completely different entity.
There were some people, merchants, tradesmen, people who actually made money off the company, who were thrilled to see us there because we were spending $112,000 a day for 4 months.
You name it, they needed it. They just bought, like locusts descending on the island. They bought and they bought and they bought.
But the local economy that didn't need us, the rich people, and the selectmen and the town politicians, just threw a lot of obstacles in our way.
We went out to Gay's Head, which is where Quint's shack was.
If they don't like you going out, they'll know you're coming in.
Menemsha is just this gorgeous little fishing village. And it was perfect. It had these little shacks, and right at the end of this harbor was this empty lot.
Except we had to go to the city council of Gay's Head in order to get permission to build the shack.
So I took it to the selectmen and showed them the model, and they said, well, you know, that's against code. I said, well, you don't understand. This is not a building, this is an illusion. It's a prop. We'll shoot it and it'll be gone.
And they refused. And I said, well, what's the problem? I mean, the man who owns the property said there's no problem. We can build it there. We're going to tear it down when we leave. It's no problem. They said, we don't like him.
After much begging and whatever political influence from the merchants that were getting now a good fair share of the money of the budget, they agreed.
I had to put up a $500,000 bond that we would return that vacant lot to its original condition, including the trash on the lot, which we did.
I don't think Zanuck and I had a peaceful moment during the 159 days of principal photography of Jaws, because there was always the possibility that something would happen to our star, the shark.
Most of the hydraulic valves on the shark were powered by electric solenoids, and they got the whole thing put together, and when they dumped it in the water, everything fried.
And so Steven had to start shooting everything but shark.
Guys, we can't shoot right now. Hold on.
Thank goodness, you know, we're dealing with people who think positively.
I can't do it in time.
Verna Fields, what a wonderful editor. Steven Spielberg and Verna and myself would sit each night and view what we had shot and make decisions about what we were doing, what we weren't doing, what we should do.
Hence the wonderful and classic beginning of Jaws, in which no shark is seen, but a woman is drawn down into the waters, and there came the terror.
I really wanted this movie to be just at water level, the way we are when we're treading water. We don't see water 3 feet off the water. We see water like this.
By holding the camera next to the water, just hand-holding it in a water box, which I had made specially for this picture. Panavision built it for me. And then I designed and built rafts so that we could work this water box right at water level. And this has a psychology about it that makes you subconsciously aware that right below the surface of that water could be that shark.
Come on in the water! I was on the beach watching them film that scene, and they had ropes tied to her.
It was an amazing rig. They tied an orange U-shaped life preserver around her legs, cabled through a concrete block, 100 yards away or so, and there were guys on the beach running along with the cable, pulling her through the water.
Unless you've experienced this kind of pressure against the water, because the water has terrible pressures on itself, and 6 or 8 people pulling you, so you know the pressure it was being put on this person being whipped back and forth in the water. It's a wonder she survived it.
For some reason or other, they both went the same time, and they broke some ribs. And she screamed. And when she screamed, she went underwater. And then she started saying, please God, dear God, like that. And the water was rolling in her mouth, and the word God would come out every once in a while. She was hurting. I mean, absolutely hurting.
I thought she was dying. I was watching it being filmed, and it was so real.
And we went with the one that really hurt her. And that's the one that's in the picture.
Well, it was Steven's desire to have the movie look as real as possible.
These were my rods and all my tackle that was used in the scenes fighting the shark. And this was the one that you saw in the movie, and probably the thing that really got you. Well, we're in my backyard amongst my souvenirs. This is the fighting chair that was used on the Orca. And there's legs that go on here, so you have a brace. This is the harness that Quint used. You put that on and you hook that right to your reel. If that reel goes overboard, you go overboard with it. So you're strapped to the chair. There's quite a lot that holds you. And that chair better be bolted to the dock, to the deck of the boat, because that's what you depend on.
What? Get behind me.
Somewhere along the line, they said that they had a local casting director coming from Texas, and would I help her as a job? And I said, well, I'd love to. Anybody could make an application, and we had them printed up, and we asked that they bring a picture with them. I kind of screened the ones who came in to see if Sherry could consider them for a speaking role.
The choice of Lee Fierro was one of the better ones. There's something about living on that island and understanding what having a child in that water can mean. You have this absolute horror of that child not coming back. When you see her coming with her old father dressed in black.
There were people all around, all over this dock. But once I came up to the mark, it seemed as if there was only him and me.
Each time they shot it, she slapped him hard.
Maybe there's a skill to slapping somebody and not slapping somebody, but Lee didn't have it. She had shined her so hard that his glasses flew off.
And I came out of character and said, oh, I'm so sorry.
And they hugged each other, and Spielberg came out and got into the hug too, so there wasn't much left of that shot.
I said, Roy, I'm sorry she's slapping you so hard. He said, oh, don't be, Sherry. He said, it's absolutely worth it.
Chief Brody?
Yes?
This is State Beach, and the scene where my son Alex was killed, and also that black lab was killed, was filmed right down there, pretty much where that pink and white umbrella is now.
Did you see that?
Even though I knew that there was a trench dug, and that there was a pipe, and that there was a vacuum, and that there was red dye, and somebody under the water going this way. And yet, it was so realistic that it really made me quite ill.
We made one shot on the beach in which we set a dolly track up from his feet on back towards the water. And what we do is we do a very fast dolly into him without changing size. But what does happen on the lens, the depth of field of the lens changes. As you dolly in, the size of the frame of the person stays the same, but the background appears to go away. Then you get this strange illusion of him floating in space towards you. And that's what created the effect. It amplified his reaction, which was good, as well as put it into some strange psychological place in the mind.
Beyond us is the jetty, and it was on that jetty there that the young girl spotted the shark fin.
Shark! Make it big! You guys okay over there?
Every day you come in from shooting, how's the shark? How are they coming? Did they try it? You know, and then they would try it and it'd break down.
Every day the sharks would be tested, and every day the jaw would go, or the eyes would pop out.
That's a much maligned shark, and I'm kind of responsible for creating a lot of the bad mouthing about the shark, because the shark was frustrating. It didn't really work all the time. It didn't work hardly at all.
So we did what we could, and we worked around the sharks.
Any special questions? Is that $3,000 bounty on the shark in cash or check?
I don't think that's funny at all.
He was a force of nature. He really was bigger than I could begin to really express.
All know me. Know how I earn a living?
He had large feelings and large moves.
He was a man I wanted to stay away from a lot because I felt he was dangerous. You never knew if he was going to smack you in the head or knock you down or embrace you or what.
He was a very dangerous guy in his own way. Wasn't tremendously happy about being an actor, preferred writing. You know, he was a wonderful writer.
His ups were up and his downs were down. And he intimidated me completely.
You got city hands, Mr. Hooper. Been counting money all your life. All right.
Shaw would get Dreyfuss and needle him.
There was a kind of sparring that went on. It was both playful and, on my part, desperate.
Rick had had some success in the movie, and that Robert just couldn't stand that, and he made Rick's life rather hell for a while.
He knew how to dish it out, so you had to learn how to dish it back.
I think it was absolutely planned. Shaw knew that the attitude between the two of them should be antagonistic, and to get it, he would create it in reality, so the actor wouldn't have to work hard at it. He'd hate his guts anyway.
Hooper! Full throttle! Won't have to take this abuse much longer.
He could be very vicious, and his humor can be very cutting. And then someone would say cut, and we would walk back to his dressing room after he had just humiliated me or tried to. And he would become in private this incredibly sweet, giving, humorous, witty, warm guy.
He was far more intellectual and far more sophisticated than most of the people around him, and was very interesting to talk to, as long as you could get away before he got too drunk.
I was madly in love with him. I must confess that he just had more energy, more intelligence, more charm, more children than anybody had ever met. But he did drink.
I was assigned one day to make sure that Robert Shaw didn't go drinking to a bar. And they went out in the water and they put him on hold. And as soon as they left, I was like, let's go, kid.
He didn't like to drink alone. And so they would send a production assistant in to drink with him. Of course, the production assistant would come reeling out in an hour. They had to send another one in because they couldn't keep up with him.
And I sat there and drank, you know, matched him drink for drink. I got sloshed. He just got better. You know, he was something.
He was never late. He was always standing in the darkness on that beach, 4 o'clock, waiting for me. And we'd go as slow as we could back to his makeup man. And we'd have a little wild turkey, which is an American bourbon that he had liked in the morning. And we'd have a couple of little sips on the way. When he got to the makeup man, his makeup man was mixing martinis. This is 4:45 in the morning.
You try this. Made it myself. Pretty good stuff.
When you saw the real Robert Shaw, he was absolutely a gorgeous man. And when you saw Quint, he just became this person.
He brought a character to life that had not the kind of energy that he brought. The whole thing about shark's eyes, y'all know me, you know, all those incredible moments of his work.
$10,000 for me by myself. For that you get the head, the tail, the whole damn thing.
There was a fellow named Craig Kingsbury, an old fisherman on the island, who was a local character, very colorful guy, great turn of phrase.
Steven said, I want Robert Shaw to spend every moment that he can with Craig Kingsbury.
That's what I was hired for, and Robert was there and met him and introduced myself. Then the young lady came in, you know, to take a test and told me to be really rough. And she laughed like hell and says, this is the one. He's about the rottenest one so far.
He was the purest version of who, in my mind, Quint really was.
Robert Shaw himself was a refined British actor and very cultured. And then he was in there trying to be a roughneck.
Jesus H. Christ. When I was a boy, every little squirt wanted to be a harpooner or a sword fisherman.
We just talk with each other, and I'd tell him, well, to Robert Shaw, this certain thing is something. To Quint, the goddamn blubber-headed son of a bitch.
You know, Craig gave me some great lines, and, you know, one of the lines was, you know, it's not like going out there to catch bluegills or tommycods. That's Craig's line.
Not like going down the pond chasing bluegills or tommycods. This shark, swallow you whole.
Craig plays a part in the film.
When we get them silly bastards down in that rock pile, there'll be some fun. They'll wish their fathers had never met their mothers when they start taking their bottoms out and slamming into them rocks, boy.
Then the shark kills him, and it's his head that rolls down.
But I've always tried to figure how you could figure that out if that shark spit the head back in the boat. Yeah. Well, that's what. The head was stuck in the boat. Now, that's a real neat shark. He didn't want to clutter up the ocean. I wonder where he spit the feet and the gizzard and stuff.
Craig Kingsbury's dialogue, Robert Shaw's persona, fused to make this sinister yet sensitive and intelligent shark hunter.
Mr. Hooper, that's the USS Indianapolis.
One of the spectacular acting moments in the movie is Quint describing being torpedoed in the Pacific during World War II aboard the USS Indianapolis.
You were on the Indianapolis? What happened?
The Indianapolis speech, which for me is my favorite part of Jaws, that was conceived by Howard Sackler.
Steven knew. This was a great motivation for Quint's character.
A wonderful scene that I kept trying to get Howard Sackler to expand, but Howard felt shorter was better and never would elaborate on it. And one day I was talking to John Milius and I said, could you make this longer? Because I think it's a speech.
My recollection is this desperate phone call, and Rick Dreyfuss saying, we gotta know why this guy hates sharks. And I wrote the thing over the phone.
Everyone took a crack at this thing. I think ultimately it was basically Steven and John.
We had probably 10 different drafts of that material, including John Milius's. The drafts multiplied as the time shrank for us to get to that scene. We had just finished dinner. Robert Shaw joined us afterwards, and he had some paper in his pocket. And he said, I think I've got a version of that speech that'll work.
Shaw rewrote Milius, who had rewritten Sackler.
And Robert Shaw read the Indianapolis speech that he had prepared. And it was, in fact, the speech that's in the film.
It was a showstopper. It was a showstopper for Robert and everyone else.
It's just, you know, the lines, they could be done any number of ways, but the way he does it.
You know the thing about a shark? He's got lifeless eyes, black eyes, like a doll's eyes.
And during that scene, it all melted. They all got together. Because the scene was designed for them to be friendly. And he let up on Dreyfuss, and Dreyfuss melted in. And they were friends then, from then on.
You want a drink? Drink to your leg? I'll drink to your leg. Okay, so we drink to our legs.
It makes not only that scene, but I think the movie, because it's the three-cornered relationship of the men that makes it a human story as well as a monster story.
Verna and Spielberg and myself, as was our habit, looked at the scene, then we knew. We knew we had turned a corner, and we knew we had a movie.
Turn on the walkie-talkie, please, Freddie.
There were radio mics all over Martha's Vineyard. And you could hear, you know, all of the communication going on. If you could just walk down the street, and you could hear, and you could hear basically every day you could hear this. The shark is not working. The shark is not working. And it was stereo all over Martha's Vineyard, everywhere.
When it came time for the producers to see the shark, you kind of rehearse those moments so that everybody will be suitably impressed.
David and I were being ferried out to the boat.
Out they came. I said, okay, cue the shark. Kersplosh, you know, flop, 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 flop.
We saw our shark dive to the bottom of the sea from a barge, and there went our careers, we thought.
It's not like today where you can fix your mistakes with a computer, and you can put the shark in with a computer if you want to. was just a big machine that took like 20 people to operate.
It was my problem from a financial standpoint because it drove us over budget, way over budget. We doubled the budget.
You know, I mean, the studio was running out of patience, there's no question about it. And things were, you know, the atmosphere was getting a little tense.
And I remember every day, about the 50th or 60th day of shooting, the crew would come over to me and they'd all ask me during the day, when are we going to be done with this movie?
And we were working for a studio that has a reputation for staying on schedule and on time. And Steven, of course, was very worried.
Steven was under enormous pressure, unlike any pressure that I've been aware of since.
And Zanuck and I, schooled in movie wisdom, said, keep shooting until they take the film out of the camera, because you may never start again if you stop.
I think one of the things that was in his favor was the fact that Lorraine Gary was playing a leading role.
My husband, Sid, was on the line, and it had that whole other kind of dynamic going for me.
No, I knew that we would finish it. I just didn't think it would be very good. I was very stupid. I was very young, you know. I didn't know what it took to make a movie.
And we warned everybody, don't tell anybody what we're doing, you know, but every time we burped, or every time the shark burped, you know, it was a headline.
I did some talk show somewhere, and I said that the film was in trouble. I can write a book about the stupid things I've said.
Mercifully, the studio did not send Lear jets with executives out because they knew they couldn't do anything about it. They couldn't shoot it, as the legend goes, in Griffith Park.
One day, you heard this.
The shark is working. Repeat. The shark is working. The boat is sinking. The boat is sinking.
And I was on that boat.
In order to get the effect we wanted, which was thinking that the shark had hit the bottom of the boat and was rocking the boat, I had them go underwater a little bit and put a big bolt in the side of the boat. And from that bolt, then I run a line underneath the boat and out to a speedboat.
We're on the Orca, about 200 yards off the coast of Chappaquiddick Island in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean.
And unbeknownst to anybody, they had pulled the planking away from the sides of the boat.
And we started taking on water for real.
We heard on the walkie-talkie these screams of panic and this riot going on.
It looked like a little miniature version of the Titanic.
I remember somebody saying, run the cameras for the insurance claims. We want to see how it's going.
And the boat was sinking, and they were cheering, you know. It was like, you know, oh, this is the end. Like, well, we're going to sink the boat, and then we can go home.
John Carter, who won an Academy Award, by the way, for Best Sound for Jaws, he picked up the Niagara. He was on the boat and held over his head and said, "F the actors, save the sound department."
At that moment, Robert Shaw got real calm and began to get very well dressed. He buttoned up and he fixed his... As the water was raising up on our legs and above our knees, we were in trouble.
I came up to the stern of the boat and said, look, just, you know, give me a fender, put something between me and the boat. And we took the Orca and shoved it up onto the beach.
And we did. We got it in pretty close to shore, and the mast was still sticking out of the water.
And explaining it to the studio that night was a rough call to make. I mean, we literally sunk.
We're going into Menipsha Pond, and this is where all the effects stuff from the boats and barges and effects barge and shark cages all ended up. And we're coming up on the shark cages that are here on the beach that we transported the sharks on. This piece here on the bottom is the old effects barge that all the controls, the big compressor that control the underwater mechanism that moved the left to right shark and the right to left. And just behind that is the Orca. That's what's left of her. Well, we're standing right inside of the Orca, and this is one we could sink on command. It had rows of barrels under here. They're still under here. And they stood on end, on an angle, and when we pulled the lever, they would tip up, sections of them, so we could sink the corners of the boat. We could level it up and get it in the position so the shark could come up and take and bite out of the stern, and we could smash it and then do it again until we got it right.
On a good day, I get 5 shots. On a good day at sea, 5 shots. On an average day, about 3. On a bad day, none.
We shot all through the summer. Basically, I think 2.5 months was added to the schedule. But eventually, Steven had enough footage to put the movie together, and then when we came back, all that was left to shoot was a few shots in the tank on the back lot at Universal.
When we got back, we were not heroes. We had gone way over budget. It was like, don't talk to the Jaws people.
By the time we got back, Steven saw his cut.
Verna Fields was our editor, reverently described in Hollywood as the mother cutter.
She was like our mom, and she cooked for us. She was a very charismatic person.
It's probably very trite to say this, but she was a worker. She was a worker bee.
Verna and I worked every day on the picture at her house in her little cutting room by the pool.
I think Steven enjoyed the fact that my mother was always willing to try things, whether they sounded crazy or not, but she would just jump right in and try it.
Well, we're looking for a nice place to show that Quint refuses to slow down the boat.
She had that ability to pluck just the right pieces here and there. And, I mean, she just made a tremendous contribution.
Well, you can't take that much pressure. That's the spot.
She's kind of an unheralded hero of the piece, in my estimation.
We needed something that everybody could say, that's a shark. We took a large Coke bottle and we shook it up real good, threw it out on the cement, and it goes shh. You put that in a zipper and a little bit of water, and you've got the shark coming out.
We showed the film to our financiers at Universal Picture in a rough cut without the music. I had to turn around and say, "What do you think?" And the response from one of the executives was, "It's okay." That was about it. Johnny Williams' score was not in there.
The shark should be represented by something in sound or in music, probably music, because there's no sound underneath the water.
I expected to hear something kind of weird and melodic, and kind of tonal but eerie.
But I thought maybe some kind of driving thing in the bottom of the orchestra might indicate the mindless attack of the shark. Boom, 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 boom.
And what he played me instead with 2 fingers on the lower keys was dun, 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 dun.
And Steven said, "Is that all?" And Johnny said, "Yeah, that's it."
One could alter the speed of this ostinato. It could be note, 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 any kind of alteration of speed to very slow, very fast, very soft, very loud. All these things could manipulate the moment. That combination of sound and image forming a memory, which can then be referred back to.
And without that score, to this day, I believe the film would have only been half as successful.
We had 2 previews. We had the first one in Dallas.
Selected because it was far from salt water, and therefore would be a great test of a movie about the sea.
Word got out, that Jaws was being previewed that night.
In those days, sneak previews gave a little hint. I think this one said a big fish story or something on the marquee.
There was the damnedest crowd I've ever seen. The Universal executives were astounded. They said, "My God."
And we went in, and our hearts were in our throats until we heard the first screams.
I remember David Brown and I were in the theater just, banging against one another saying, "It works," because they were screaming so loud. We really thought they might start laughing.
We went into a nearby hotel and examined the cards that the audience filled out, giving their idea of the movie, and they were great, huge.
There was such a frenzy of excitement with the audience. I mean, people were just, fainting.
We took it then to Long Beach, California, a American Navy base, and it played the same way there.
So when that preview, which is a smash preview, the scores are higher, the studio is flying on cloud 9, that they're going to make a fortune with the movie, they keep saying.
There is a creature alive today who has survived millions of years of evolution without change, without passion, and without logic.
The marketing of Jaws was a media event.
We thought of all kinds of shark-related things. We made up a list of do's and don'ts, all these things that would create interest and additional conversation.
Maybe too intense for younger children.
For some reason that we'll never understand, there were a series of shark sightings and attacks.
It lives to kill.
Every shark attack was attributed to our public relations people.
A mindless eating machine.
And then accidentally, there was a great white shark on the cover of Time magazine because somebody had gotten bit in San Diego. We didn't stage that.
It will attack and devour anything.
I think the success of that film was due to an amazing coordination of everything that happened. The publicity happened right, the book was published, it was co-hyped by the movie company.
From the best-selling novel, Jaws.
Lifeguards were falling asleep at their stations. Nobody was going in the water. But they were all at the beach reading the book.
See it before you go swimming.
And that notion of selling a picture as an event, as a phenomenon, as a destination, was born with that release.
My husband keeps citing this as the movie that changed the way movies are made and got us to where we are today, which is, if it's not a $100 million movie, it doesn't get the kind of support it needs from the studio.
Jaws was a historic film for many reasons, and one of the reasons which survives to this day, for better or for worse, is the notion of a summer blockbuster film.
It was a good thing at the time. It's an awful legacy to now have everyone used to an enormous hit-you-over-the-head television campaign, which costs so much money.
Today's blockbusters, they come out, even Steven's Lost World had a couple of weeks as #1 and was replaced by something. We stayed all the way through the summer as #1 all the way through.
When I saw Jaws, I forgot that I was in the movie. And that's a trick. Not only did I forget, I was sitting up in the balcony, and I was as swept up in this story as if I'd never heard it. I didn't know what was coming next. It scared the crap out of me.
I had 2 surfer sons when this movie was released. I love the ocean, but I'm still aware of my fear because of this movie.
And to this day, whenever I meet anyone and mention Jaws, that person says, you know, I've never felt the same in the water since I saw that movie more than 20 years ago.
E.O. Wilson said, "We don't just fear our predators, we are transfixed by them, prone to weave stories and fables and chatter endlessly about them, because fascination breeds preparedness, and preparedness survival. In a deeply tribal sense, we love our monsters."
It's pride of species, you know. It taps into some very primal thing that all of our political correctness and awareness of the planet hasn't erased at all, and will never erase, you know.
There is something about sharks that drives people crazy. They're kind of like, you know, cockroaches and rats and snakes. They trigger some kind of primal disgust or fear.
I know there was a lot of talk about the fact that I had ruined sharks and I should be cursed and all the rest. I defended. I think it was a nonsensical accusation. I think what it did, and what I find very gratifying today, is that the book and the movie are coming into the consciousness of children who weren't born when either the book or the movie was released, and they are not horrified by sharks, they are fascinated. I get 1,000 letters a year from children who want to be marine biologists, who want to study sharks. Sharks are cool, man! So I am delighted that is the long-term effect of Jaws in all of its manifestations.
And meet the original Mr. Cool in 2 takes of A Shark's Tale, next on BBC Two.